Hello, welcome back to my studio. It's been quite a long time since I did the last video. I've been asked to do this one by one of my students in my art classes. We've been studying 20th century travel posters and advertising design from the 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s. And this is a piece that I've been doing some work on as the demonstrations for the classes. And I've come to the point where I'm just going to add the last word on at the bottom of the poster. So I was asked to show how I do, what the process is for transferring the lettering onto the watercolour paper. So here is a photocopy of my design for the lettering on just ordinary thin paper. And what I've done is put on the back some watercolour pencil. It's just, there you go, you can see the pencil. I've scribbled over the back of the photocopy. So this is giving a really good thick layer of watercolour. Same sort of thing as you would do normally with a graphite pencil. But I prefer, when I'm doing a watercolour, to have a watercolour pencil line so that just becomes at one with the paint that I'm going to put on to do the colouring in of the lettering. Just making sure that there's really loads and loads on the back of the photocopy there. I'm going to transfer that word down. Right. And on the photocopy I've got these little registration marks. I don't know if you can see. Little registration marks in two places where I can line those up with the same marks on the paper. And it makes sure that the tracing comes down to the same point every time. Excuse me if you see the back of my head. Let's line those up like that. And I've been doing it one letter at a time so that if I trace down the whole word, I would end up, when I'm doing the painting, with my hand resting on the rest of the lettering. So I just find it easier just to do one letter at a time. And it also means that as I'm doing the process, I'm having a change of activity. I'm not doing the same thing for hours on end. And it means that I don't get so fatigued, because if you do the same job repeatedly, of course you get physical and mental fatigue. So this just means if I do one letter, and what I'm doing here is I'm using an HB pencil, really hard, well, not really hard, quite a hard pencil, sharpened up nice to a nice point. And I'm using that to go over my design. And this will be transferring, let's just have a peep and see. I'm saying it will be transferring, yeah. Transferring the watercolour pencil down to the paper, which I have no idea whether you can see that. I'll have to check on the video later, but it is. I can see enough to be able to go over it with the watercolour pencil. Now what I'm finding a little bit difficult at the moment is because I'm trying to keep my work in shot, I'm not able to turn it round. And normally when I'm working on any shapes like this, these shapes on this side of the curve are easy to do because that's the way my hand is naturally going. But when I come around this side of the curve, it's much more difficult to do in this area. My fingers are just not happy going in that direction, just the way your joints work in your hands. So it's much easier, this is a tricky bit to do here, much easier if you can, is to turn the work round rather than having to get at it from all these awkward angles. Anyway, it'll do. So I can see well enough that outline, and then I'm going to get the watercolour pencil again. You can go over that line and make it clearer to see. And then I'll start filling it in with paint. I'm planning to do these letters in a dark green. And then the border is going to start dark green down here and then go up at the top, end at this kind of lovely denim blue colour. So here I am, listening to the rain pitter-pattering on the roof. Fire's crackling in the background, it's nice and cosy down here. Right, so that reinforcing line is there. I've finished drawing. And I'm just getting the colour ready, which is ultramarine blue. That's that one, ultramarine blue, and yellow ochre. The colour for the smaller lettering was burnt umber and ultramarine blue. So both these colours have ultramarine in common, which means, and in fact, all the colours I've used on the whole piece of work are just burnt umber, yellow ochre, ultramarine blue and carmine. So they're just mixtures of pairs of each of these colours, which gives the whole thing cohesion, harmony. I quite like to use the fewest possible number of colours as I can in any painting, so that it gives a nice sort of togetherness about the way the colours look. So here I'm just been mixing my green. It's quite a bluey green at the moment, and I'm just testing it out on the paper close to this colour, so that I can see that it's different enough. You can see that it's quite similar because they've both got ultramarine blue in them, but this one's more green because of the yellow ochre that I've added to it as well. Maybe a bit more yellow ochre, just to make it clearer that it's green and not blue. And I also want it to be quite a strong mixture as well. The lettering obviously has to be quite contrasty, so a nice strong dark colour against the pale background. Okay, let's have a look at that. Now, when I'm doing my lettering, I find the secret is, which is what I told my student, I said, the secret is to slow right down. And the other secret is not to talk, because, well, either the painting goes right or the talking goes right, but I can't make them both go right together. So I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to sit here and paint while you watch. So the brush is a Sceptre Gold, which is a sable and synthetic mix brush made by Winsor and Newton, and it's a number 4. So it's not the thinnest brush in the world, but it comes to a nice point, which is of course important to getting into these little fiddly spaces here. No right or wrong way to do this. You just have to experiment a little bit sometimes to find out what works for you, and get to know your brushes, be familiar with your brushes and the language that they speak. You can only do that by playing with them. To do so many bits of play before you try and make a piece of work. Practice, practice, practice. slow work, while I'm sitting here doing my slow work, it makes everything else that might be bothering me or annoying me today disappear into the background, because all I'm concentrating on is the tip of the brush, and there's no room in my mind to worry about anything else. Ta-da! Yeah. So there's the letter C. And I shall carry on. What I'll do is I'll finish the rest of the lettering, because what I need to do now, of course, is to let that dry and then put my master copy back on top, transfer the R down, outline it with the watercolour pencil and fill it in with the green. I shall be sitting here, I don't know, how long did that take? No idea. I'll be sitting here for another couple of hours probably, finishing this word. Okay, I hope you like that. See you later. There we are, lettering nearly all done now. I've set the camera up a little bit closer so that when I do this last letter, you'll be able to see a bit of brushwork, hopefully, how I use this fairly narrow brush, this Sceptre Gold by Winsor and Newton number 4 brush, which I'll just show you 2 ways that I use for making marks with this brush, because it's not a very thin brush. It means that when I press down I can fill quite a large area. Okay, so I was using the full body of the brush, and then having pressed down you can see that it forms itself into a kind of a chisel shape. So it's wide that way, really narrow that way, which means that then with the point of the brush I can make very fine marks and get into those fiddly little points. So, so there's a lot of things you can have a look at as I'm painting, including the direction the brush is pointing in relative to the shapes of the letter. So hopefully that'll help. Here goes. When it comes to a point, this brush, it's got a slight curve to it. So if I use it that way, I can get into those points. And if I use it that way, I can get into these shape points. And you saw me come down this side of the letter, so I was paying attention to the brush going along this line, but sort of keeping half an eye on the back of the brush. This side of the mark didn't overlap this side of the shape. See, that paint there is still wet, so as I'm painting, the fresh colour is blending quite nicely into the first area that I painted. It's one of the potential problems with watercolour is that you get tide marks. So if I spend a lot of time down here, it could be that this area here dries and I end up with a little line. But it's cool in here. The atmosphere is really cool today and the humidity is quite high, and it means that paper's cool and probably very slightly damp as well. And all those things affect the speed at which your paint dries. So, of course, with watercolour you want it to be just in the Goldilocks spot where it's just right. It's not drying too fast, it's not drying too slow, it's not too humid, not too dry. There's lots of things that you can't actually, well, you can control to a certain extent, but you can't entirely control the climate you're painting in. I think this mixture is slightly weaker than what I was using yesterday, but I'm not worried about that because I can always go over it again when it's dry, when it's bone dry. This is one of the things with watercolour, is that, again, it's about timing, I suppose. If you work into it when it's wet, it's fine. If you work on top of it when it's dry, it's fine. But if you start fiddling around with it when it's slightly damp, it tends not to behave very well. This is something that you should find out by playing. I can hear a squirrel running around on the roof of the studio. It's quite nice. There's a big oak tree growing nearby and it sheds its acorns. So there's a period of a couple of weeks in the autumn where it's really noisy in here. You can hear all the acorns dropping on the roof. And then the rest of the winter, on days when it's not too cold, you hear these little feet running round above your head. Squirrels, and sometimes there's birds up there too. Pigeons. Right, there we go. Yeah, that's definitely going to need another coat. But I hope you were able to see, and it was helpful to see what I did, which I can't describe in words, it's just what I do. And might be some help to you to see how I use the brush to do that last letter.